Hey, Brent. Welcome to Southern Fried Sports.
Hey, bro. I didn't, as a matter of fact, so that was interesting. I know that it helped me on this. I know that this year is some significant anniversaries for the band, too, because I've seen some specials on them. And name for that, when did that gym teacher came from?
Lee High School.
It's true, that bunch is fascinating, is it not?
Yeah, Lee High School coach Leonard Skinner. Yeah, they went head to head. They butted heads with Coach Skinner over there off the west side of Jacksonville, and that hence came to the name of the band. Now, speaking of Northeast Florida, I guess the Florida Gators were pretty happy with how those college football playoff rankings shook out last night.
Yeah, they are number 9 right now, and looking at the possibility, obviously, of a New Year's Six Bowl, the way things have shaken out for them. And listen, frankly, I mean, they did what they needed to do, Travis. They beat their rival Florida State, and it frankly wasn't even close. Another 10-win season. So a lot of optimism, and a lot of optimism now goes with the possibility of getting into a New Year's Day bowl. And I don't have to tell you, but all that leads to probably expectations that are sky high next year, I would think.
You know, it's been kind of sad in a way, though, to see the response by some of the Gator media down there since the weekend about, sticking out their chest about Florida should be ranked ahead of Alabama. Florida should be going to a New Year's Six game. It kind of made me wonder what the standard is down there now. It used to be, win a national championship when Urban Meyer was there and Steve Spurrier was there.
Before they have the standard, I think that they think they should have, if that makes sense. So, I mean, look, they're are they in much better situation than anybody else in the state right now? They are. That's very true. But I think this bowl situation is going to kind of increase a little bit of that too. But I'm glad Kyle Trask, who certainly is one of the better stories in the whole league this year, came up and did as well as he did. I mean, they are who they are in throwing the ball. They're going to have to establish some kind of running game next year. But especially if Trav, if they end up in the Orange Bowl, that they should have pretty good contingent going to that.
You mentioned it, Florida in relation to Florida State and Miami right now, which are certainly porous when you look at those two programs in comparison to where they've been in the not too distant past. With that said, is Florida really capitalizing though on the situation with Florida State in Miami right now? I look at the recruiting rankings. Yeah. I see Florida at number 10 in the nation. That's certainly respectable. But, Steve Spurrier in an era when he had Bobby Bowden to his west, and he had, guys that were certainly formidable, Butch Davis, guys that were legitimate threats as coaches at Miami. Steve Spurrier didn't even care about recruiting. He was bringing in top 5 classes. Is Florida really capitalizing, I guess? At 10 wins, that's great. But again, relative to the success, the standard that's been in play in previous regimes, you think Florida's really that close to taking the next step and overtaking, say, Georgia, even in its own division, Brent?
They've got to do much better recruiting. There's no question about that. I think even Gator beat writers will tell you that, and that's the thing that we've heard from them. In other words, have they done enough this year by by Mullen showing they can throw the ball around and they can score some points, and that they did some good things defensively. I mean, is that going to translate for them? And the truth of the matter is, it really hadn't yet. I'm going to be fascinated to see, and you touched on it, if that number 10 ranking can go up to 7 or 8 or even edge.
Should be in the 5. Should be top 5.
On around 5. And Trav, the truth of the matter is that may not happen for them to next year.
Yeah, I don't think it's happening this year. And so what I hear a lot of, and I think Dan Mullen is a really, really solid coach. I do. But I hear a lot of the same Mississippi State stuff we used to hear, a win or two more a year right now at Florida. But I think that's going to continue to be the question. Can Mullen get enough of the kind of guys in there that when you look at Georgia's roster, for instance, you feel like you can go player for player and match up? You know, I think Mullen can coach them in a way in which they can be competitive with Georgia. But Kirby's not going to cut back on the roster anytime soon. And I'll tell you this, too. You know, we get so caught up in Florida and Georgia right now. If Jeremy Pruitt really has this thing headed in the right direction, he's going to have a roster representable to what Florida's putting out there. So you're going to have to deal with Jeremy Pruitt, too, at some point.
Well, and I tell you, you and I both know some of those players that come from the state of Florida, aren't they, Trav?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that they're going to have to deal with too. Now, again, what we also don't know is who's coming in at Florida State. And I think after Matt Campbell signed his extension, that eliminated him. Now, you still hear about Mike Norvell from Memphis, who I think would do a decent job. You've still got some James Franklin, Brian Kelly stuff that I think just more rumor going on. So my thing is, it's not only the teams you mentioned, but even in the state, if Florida State is able to make a statement, and I'm not saying they will, that's going to make it harder for Mullen too. And then, I mean, it looks like now, believe it or not, there's still a lot of talk about Willie Taggart going back to South Florida. Manny Diaz right now, and this is something I learned from you years ago, with the year that they had and the way that season ended, he'll get next year, but that honeymoon's been cut by a year, wouldn't you think, by the way they finished the season in November in Coral Gables?
No doubt about it. And some of these coaching openings, Brent, you've got conference championship games this week and this weekend involving some of these candidates that you touched on. And so with that, you know, you've got Lane Kiffin at Florida Atlantic. You've got Mike Norvell. You've even got now, you're hearing Jim McElwain in connection with the Missouri opening, the former Alabama offensive coordinator, Florida head coach. Do you think early next week we start to see some of these guys slot into some of these openings?
Oh, yeah. I don't think there's any question about it, particularly when we're just a little over 2 weeks away from the first signing period. That really, to me, Travis, has revamped everything, and that's a reason why they want a lot of these guys already on deck. I don't think there's any question about that. And I mean, logically, it kind of looks like that's what Florida State's doing. Is they're waiting on Norvell. Of course, there's also a train of thought that they don't know what they're doing and they don't know where to go from here. So it really kind of depends on who you believe. But yeah, there's no question that a lot of this situation is going to have to be determined really over the next 5 or 6 days.
Yeah, Lane potentially in play with Arkansas. Yeah, a lot of this you would think. You're right. It's a great point about the early signing period and how it impacts things. Not only coaches on the move, but SEC quarterback free agency is underway, Brent. Felipe Franks from your neck of the woods announces here in the last few days that he's going to wrap up his college career elsewhere. Jake Bentley, to no surprise, going to do the same, leaving South Carolina. Which of those two guys do you think will be most attractive out on that open market? And do you think one or both could end up staying in the league?
As you know, with Franks, he's a nice physical specimen that's got a strong arm, but the problem is the decision making is just not there, is it, Trav? And frankly, that's to me one of the big reasons Trask won the job at Florida. So I think what you'll get is a lot of people looking at Franks just because of the intangibles and what he can do, but between the two, if I had to choose one, I'd probably go with Bentley, frankly. And see, I would be. Trev, I'd be very interested, and I think we talked about this a few months ago. Bentley has not got that much better than when he first got in, and what Bentley could get with some better coaching wherever he goes next.
What about Jake Bentley somewhere like Miami with Dan Enos?
Well, yes.
Would that make sense?
Listen, right now, with what they've got and how inconsistent, and people may forget that's where Dan Enos went.
Right.
And look, even Enos, who I think is a good quarterback developer, hadn't really been able to do a whole lot with that crew down there. And listen, Tate Martell, Trav, you don't know what he's doing from one day to the next. One day he's on the team, one day he's not. And N'Kosi Perry is quite frankly not much. I mean, they're 6-6 and could go into a lower tier bowl. They're not going to do that much, but yeah, listen, Bentley could come in and I think be a serviceable quarterback for them.
Chances LSU has a grad transfer quarterback step in for its grad transfer quarterback in 2020, Brent.
That'd be apropos, wouldn't it? Hey, and Trav, if Joe Brady remains over there, it sounds like is going to break the bank in order to keep him, unless he gets a head job somewhere. And I'm a little surprised that we hadn't heard more about that. And maybe we will after the SEC championship game. But listen, don't you think you'd have a string of them lining up to maybe get with Joe Brady into play over there in order to maybe play for a championship or go to the NFL?
No doubt about it. Speaking of Joe Brady and the LSU Tigers and grad transfer quarterback Joe Burrow, LSU up to a 7-point favorite now in the SEC championship game matchup with Georgia on Saturday afternoon. Game opened at -4 in favor of LSU. Can Georgia get this done, Brent, in your opinion, given its style of play on offense, given its injuries now? And really just lean on that defense and DeAndre Swift and some of Jake Fromm in the passing game. Is there a path, I guess I'm asking you, for Georgia to pull this game out Saturday against LSU?
I think it's possible because I think their defense is playing extremely well right now. The thing that is discouraging to me about picking Georgia would be Lawrence Cager not being able to play.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a stat out there, Trav, that when Cager plays, that Fromm is a 70% passer. When he doesn't, he's a 56% passer. So they're going to have to lean on that running game, Rodrigo Blankenship. I mean, I think they can probably move the ball on LSU, but I think the matchup for this game is a Georgia O-line and the LSU defensive line. And listen, again, to me, that the thing in Georgia now leads the conference and is second in the nation in rush defense, allowing 71 yards a game. Trav, to me, it's Burrow's legs and they've got to stop if they want to win this game. I mean, I get the LSU receivers in that passing game and how dangerous it is, but your listener saw this up close and personal. Trev, if you're going to beat LSU, you've got to contain Burrow and Hillar and catching passes and running the ball. To me, that's the key to the game.
Yeah, you really got to close down the middle of the field in general, because that's where Burrow is especially effective, whether with his legs, whether with the passing game. And you're right about Edwards-Helaire. The formula for LSU, as much as we talk about Burrow and those wide receivers, you get Edwards-Helaire north of 25 touches in a game, and it's typically going to work out pretty well for LSU. Brent, as we let you go here, game not involving the Southeastern Conference this weekend that maybe piques your interest the most. Is it Baylor, Oklahoma? Is it Oregon, Utah on Friday night? Is it Wisconsin, Ohio State? Which of these games attracts your interest the most, other than Georgia, LSU?
I certainly could see Oklahoma, Baylor being another shootout. I really like that Oregon, Utah game. And where that could go. And look, I don't think the committee is. I know they like Utah, but I think when you think about the intangibles of ratings and things like that, I don't know how endearing that Utah is to them. Although Utah is a really good team, and they've done a great. They're much better defensively than people think they are. So I'll go with that. I think that's going to be a fascinating game to see. Cincinnati, Memphis playing basically back-to-back weeks, and one thing, Trav, that a lot of these that the MAC and some of these other conferences should have done, they should have played those championship games. And I get the attendance stuff, but as far as the national exposure, they should have had those games starting last night, had one tonight, had one tomorrow, and they could have had a lot more people watching those games than they will on Saturday, when a lot of people would ignore them.
Yeah, the MAC, the Sun Belt, CUSA. I agree. Some missed opportunities here. I understand, you may have been coming off a weekend in which you had play in some of those leagues, I guess, but could have staggered them in a way in which the exposure would have been far greater than it's going to be as say early games on Saturday. Hey, Brent, I got to ask you about this Alabama team. 10-2 regular season. We know about all the injuries, all the inexperience, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Mac Jones from down there in Jacksonville, his performance on Saturday against Auburn. Did that game sort of just kind of encapsulate the season in general for Alabama, in your opinion?
Oh yeah. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the kicking situation or the lack thereof. The penalties. It really did. I mean, anything you can think of, the run defense struggling, the linebackers being out of position. I mean, you can go on and on. Now, you've always got to have, when you play Auburn down there, as a friend of mine has described it, some Auburn voodoo, meaning that fumbles roll out of bounds and passes batted up in the air that are almost intercepted but are not, and then the field goal situation at the end of the first half. But with all that said, there's no doubt it was the season in a lot of ways. And listen, as disappointing as this season was, the other reality is, I mean, they're 9 points away from still being seeded number one going into the SEC championship this weekend against Georgia, where even a loss, they'd still be in the playoffs. So, I mean, even with the injuries and all the difficulties, sometimes it's a tightrope and it's a razor's edge on how close you can be to actually being in this playoff situation.
Yeah, in some ways, what Alabama fans suffered through this year is actually, I think, going to prove positive for 2020 and beyond because of all the new faces. And, but it will be interesting from a coaching staff standpoint for really a third straight year to see which direction that goes here in the offseason, Brent.
Well, and I think he makes some changes. Frankly, I think what he will do is that he will particularly go out and get an experienced D coordinator, and again, who knows who that could be. I mean, you've got a Charlie.
A lot of them on the market right now
at this point. But it after and guys like that, and I think that's eventually what he will end up doing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because there are. I mean, you got Todd Orlando cut loose at Texas. Right. Guys like Mike McIntyre over at Ole Miss. You said Charlie Strong. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see which way the staff sort of goes. Maybe even on both sides of the ball. So we'll see. Hey, Brent, as always, great stuff with us here. Always appreciate your great work there at College Sports Today and also First Coast News. Give Brent a follow on Twitter if you haven't already, at Brent Beaird, BrentBeaird. Thanks, Brent.
My pleasure, pal.